extremely knowledgeable about solar power. He has a big background and he's done quite a bit, and he will tell you, I think, what he's done better than I can. But thank you for coming, and we appreciate it, and take it away.
Well, I've always been a curious sort. I've asked lots of questions. Does anybody want me to use the microphone?
Yes.
So, I've always been very curious and how things work and why things work, and I ask a lot of questions wherever I'm at. So, I happened to be standing by somebody in the food line a little while ago, and I thought, that face looks familiar. I should know who it was. I finally had to ask him who his name was. So Harold, would you stand up here? Harold Alt is the person I worked with probably over 20 years ago in the wind power business. And you came from, just why don't you tell them where you came from this morning and what company you work for and where they're at.
Well, I came from Mount Vernon.
Mount Vernon.
Down in Churdan. Out to my mom. And I work for Skate International. It's a company from Denmark. I think my fourth Danish company I work for.
This guy worked for a company in Denmark for how many years now?
Since we met since 2006.
2006. So he works in Iowa, out of his home, for a company from Denmark. And why Denmark?
Denmark is the birthplace of wind in many respects. Most of the turbines and parts. It was developed in the 80s in California, but then government support lapsed for years, and the Danes just picked it up, and it's been a staple. I think Iowa's a great place for renewable energy. First state in the union to have it in 86, so I'm proud to. Well, I'm not really just to hear this talk. I agree.
Well, you drove the longest distance to get here. So you did the work for that. How much does he get? I agree.
Just the pleasure of being with you.
So here's the topics I'll cover today. A little bit about the history of wind power, the start of commercial wind scale power in Iowa, and how I got involved with wind power, and why Iowa eventually became a leader in wind power, thousands of wind turbines. So, wind power has been around a really long time, and it's been used for boats. It's been used for grinding grain and pumping water for thousands of years. And I didn't even know this is involved with food production for about 1,000 years. So it's been harnessed in very simple ways. People have seen pictures like this of windmills, and you think, how does this produce any power? The wind would blow right through those slats there. Well, they put cloth sails on those blades when they wanted the wind turbine to turn. Whoops, sorry, a little too fast here. So, wind power was first used for generating electricity about 135 years ago. That's a long time. That's before most of the country was even electrified with the grid. And so here's a wind turbine, and you see a little red circle down the bottom. That's the person down there. It was really huge, and it looked a little like a farm pumping wind turbine. Lots of blades, 100 blades around there, and a big tail out here to orient the blades into the wind. And I didn't know this, but wind power was actually used on ships to generate electricity. Electricity is pretty valuable, it's very versatile in doing things. And this is a picture of a boat. It was in 1902. It was a whaling boat, and it says down here, last resting place for this whaling boat. Sitting, do people abandon boats like this? Did they used to do that in the old days? They just beached it and let it go and let people let it decay? I don't know what happened. But the fact that there was a wind turbine on that boat to generate electricity is kind of surprising. And then we got in the big adoption of wind power was in starting after 1916 in the 20s and 30s. Does anybody know why there were so many of these wind turbines out in the country? What was the reason for farmers installing these?
Water.
Water? No, not these windmills.
Electricity.
Electricity for what?
We didn't have electricity in our house, so I was 6 years old, we had a Delta generator.
A Delco generator, right. How many of you remember some farm having a wind turbine generating like low voltage power, like 6 or 12 or even 32 volts? Anybody can remember a turbine on a farm? You can? Where was that at?
Southern Iowa.
Southern Iowa, okay. That doesn't count. We're talking about green. But anyway, the grid, the United States, lots of towns have electricity about 1900 or so, electrified all the towns, but it was just too expensive to run power lines out into the country. You know, a farm might have just one light bulb hanging in their kitchen, and it just didn't generate enough revenue for utilities to afford the investment. So in 1935, the Rural Electrification Act was passed by Congress, which allowed the rural electric cooperatives to start. And Greene County started in 1937, is when Greene County. But prior to that time, if you wanted electricity and you were near a town or along a main line between the towns, this is what you had to do to get electricity. You had to have batteries to store power. So you'll find lots of these wind turbines around, and you can find lots of wind turbines in museums there, and there's just a few of them that you can for hobbies. I know somebody that owns one of these just as a hobby, and so. And then the modern wind turbine was invented 67 years ago, in 1957, again by a Danish engineer, Denmark. Denmark was the leader in wind power in the world. And this is probably really boring to about everybody in here except me and Harold. Because this is a design, when we look at this, we see a few key things. One is the tip brake right here. If you see, there's a little section of the blade here that turns 90 degrees to keep it from overspeeding in high winds. And the design of this blade, the type of generator, electric induction generator here, and then there's little motors down here to turn the wind turbine so that it's always facing the wind. It's called a yaw motor. Innovative designs, very innovative designs. Denmark had this first, and it was actually retired, and the United States, NASA, our National Aeronautical Space Administration, went over to Denmark and had them repower this thing, get it refurbished, and they did a bunch of testing on this turbine right here. Testing for a number of years to just figure out how to improve upon this design. And this design influenced the whole world. All of the initial designs of wind turbines were based on this turbine in Denmark. And so it's preserved in a park in Denmark. I have not seen this myself. Have you seen this, Aaron? So anyway, that's just the geeks lesson here. So wind power was really taken out in California in the mid-1980s. And it all started with the crisis. And does anybody remember what the energy crisis we had was? The energy crisis.
Late 70s?
What caused it?
Late 70s?
Yeah.
73.
Yep, 73. It was the Arab oil embargo on wood. Why did it hurt the United It's because we imported a lot of oil. We were not, we were dependent on oil. Does anybody remember gas lines? Does anybody remember that period? What do you remember about that period?
Certain days you don't get gas, certain stations.
Certain stations you couldn't get gas. Yep. Anybody else?
You could only buy 10 gallon where we live.
10 gallons at a time. Yep. Anything else?
55 miles.
55? That started after that because of energy conservation.
Those are really close together.
Yep.
It doesn't happen here.
Yep, I'll talk about that in just a second. And in 1979, there was a second energy crisis caused by a revolution in Iran, and I forgot about that. And our response as a country was that we need to become more energy independent. We really needed to do that. And one thing was electricity. And so California led the way, and they provided some very, very generous tax credits for companies that would install wind turbines. Well, the wind industry was just in its infancy. There were hardly many companies at all that made turbines. But money, incentives in California started the whole wind industry in the world, really. It got investment going. And how many of you have been to California and driven around and seen those large wind farms? Yeah. Most everybody has. And like a lot of people have noticed, in some areas, the wind turbines are just really, really heavily thick. They're close together. And why do you think that is? You don't find that in Iowa, do you? They're all spread out like that. So why is it in California you find areas where they're just thick, like this is by Palm Springs?
Lack of land.
Lack of land?
Because that's where the wind was.
That's where the wind was. There wasn't wind everywhere in these areas. It was in the passes. Usually you had to have some sort of mountain range and then a low area and other mountains. And you had to have a difference between the ocean and the desert. Remember in the early morning hours, the ocean is warmer than the desert oftentimes. Desert cools off overnight. And you get this pattern of wind flow that changes. So as the desert heats up and the sun comes out, the wind comes from the ocean, comes to the desert, heats up, and expands and goes up. And there's a circulation pattern that happens. And then in the afternoon, late afternoon, it'll stop and it'll turn around. So these wind turbines will turn one way in the morning and they'll turn another way in the afternoon because the wind changes direction. But it's a steady pattern that you can depend upon. And if you go outside of those passes, there wasn't going to be very much wind at all. So it was where the wind was at. So here's another picture going over the top. Sorry.
Those were well received, were they? Are California people?
They were.
Or not?
I have no idea. I wasn't out there. So.
No, they didn't think it was
The thing is spoiled beauty. The view shed, right? Yeah. I can see it. I can understand that. And here's pictures of more wind turbines. I've spent some time out in both of the three major areas in California. And I just want you to notice these turbines are close together because the wind comes this way or it comes directly opposite. It never goes in line with the wind turbines. It never goes in line with the wind turbines. It goes crosswise. And you look, you see here's the cell cover up here. You know, there's a fiberglass cover at the top. And it's missing one there. And it's missing one there too. And it turns out that they found out in that area it didn't rain too much. And you really did need to have the cover on it. And the cover was just in the way oftentimes. Doing maintenance. How many of you could have done this at some point in your life? I'm just curious. I know there's got to be a few people here. I could have done this maybe when I was 25 years old. I had enough nerve to do that. But you know, they've got safety harness on, but you know, if you fall, it's kind of difficult to get out of it. But anyway, they just took the cover off, and here's the generator, and here's the gearbox, and here's the turbines turn much slower, and your box speeds up for the generator. So, got some work. Look all wind technicians. And here's a picture I took. This is there's Palm Springs, again, this pass, this whole area here. And it looks like it's kind of foggy here. It's not foggy. This is smog. This is blowing smog from the LA, Los Angeles. From all the cars, the millions of cars in Los Angeles. A lot of pollution is created. And that smog would be blown into the desert, go past the wind turbines, and heat up the desert there. But anyway, it's really depressing to see that. That was